Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from YellowCat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Managers of Reddit, in what unexpected ways have job candidates impressed you during interviews? Was doing a phone screen, extremely qualified candidate but listed a previous employer as the Atlantic Ocean. I asked what he meant because WTF, and he said, I was a fisherman for 2 years and moved around a lot. I met a lot of great people and learned a lot, but I hated it. I didn't get to think through complex problems and I wasn't really helping anyone. It's what convinced me to get my PhD. I didn't want to leave that part of my work history blank, and I find that it's better if I bring it up since it's the driving force behind where I am today. Went from this guy seems weird to D, I have a lot of respect for him in 30 seconds flat. Seeing as my last interview post was quite a hit, I have a more positive gem that fits this topic. College student was applying for a junior manager position with no resume. A colleague of mine allowed this guy to walk into my office for a conversation. He was dressed in literally a tuxedo with tails and white gloves. I immediately cracked a joke stating, "Ah yes, Mr. Peanut, I've been expecting you." I was the only one that laughed. He claimed he had scheduled a meeting with me regarding the junior manager position. I asked him for his resume, as anyone would do. I was told, I do not believe in resumes, however, I can tell you my story through these tarot cards. In my head, I'm thinking, oh MFG, what I wouldn't do for a push-button trapdoor into this guy's chair. I played along and allowed him to proceed with his mystical tarot card story. Long story short, he had about 5 to 6 cards that he showed me, all with a story about past work experiences. I wasn't impressed at all with his thrift store beat-up tuxedo or his crappy card stories. I was impressed that someone had the balls to dress like this for an interview and commit to his routine. He was not hired as he does not have the necessary past work experience, a resume required, references required, etc., etc. This might be not being relevant to this thread, but my coworker who interviewed me likes to tell people the story of how I got hired during happy hours. I graduated college and was 5 months in doing interviews, and I got a network connection for an interview with my current company. We talked about the technical role and the juicy stuff until he put me on the spot, pointing out that my GPA was missing and he knew that my college academics weren't the best based on the network connection I had. So he asked me to lay out the honest truth about my college experience and what I felt I gained. I went 100% honesty and told him while I wasn't the best student, I wasn't a book person and learned by experiences. Going to college, you get exposed to a lot of different types of people and lots of different situations. I wasn't part of a fraternity, but I might as well should have been based on some of the experiences I've had. I've learned to play with the punches and adapt to BS. To be frank, I was pretty desperate for a job and was just open about how I wanted more in my life in college and just did enough to get by. I was 100% on financial aid and was working odd jobs here and there to pay off rent and bills while being a full-time student. But by doing so, I learned how to operate life while dealing with fires happening around me. I got an email back from him the next day that I better press my best suit, shine my shoes, and download the Chick-fil-A app because he works with a team of ladies and he wanted Chick-fil-A on the day of my on-site. Never have I taken an email so seriously. I got hired that day after fulfilling those requirements on the on-site and talking with the rest of the team. I'm a recruiter. Candidate was interviewing for an extremely technical sales role that traditionally requires a chemical engineering degree, which she did not have, and it was a deal breaker. When the manager told her this, she said she completely understands, but is extremely interested and asked if he had any recommendations of books for her to read to get up to speed. He listed 6 highly technical chemical engineering books, or whatever they were. She showed up on Monday, asked to see him, and asked him to ask her about any of the subjects in any of the books. She nailed it and worked there over 20 years as their #1 sales executive. I'm a graduate assistant in the campus rec field, and what a lot of people don't realize is that assistantships in this field are actually quite competitive. As I'm finishing up my program this summer, we looked this past semester for my replacement and narrowed it down to 4 final Skype interviews. The girl who ended up being our final choice was very personable with us. At this point in the process, all of the candidates were qualified for the position, but we wanted someone who'd fit in well and really gel with the office culture we had going. So basically, we wanted someone who could have a conversation in the interview and not just spout off their bullet points. This girl was so easy to talk to and engaging, and we ended up having a conversation about our favorite Netflix shows, her top being Parks and Rec and The Office, mine and my supervisor's favorite shows. It was tough deciding who to choose, but this girl just knocked it out of the park by sending us the best thank you email I think I've ever received. In her email, she was incredibly sincere and passionate. She even quoted Leslie Knope when referencing her passion and made it very clear that our staff was exactly the kind of people she'd been looking for. It was incredibly honest and caring. After that email, it was an easy decision who to choose. This goes along with something a director told me once. The best thing you can do in any interview is to show that you're a people person and can get along with others. You can be the most qualified person out there, but no one wants to work with someone they can't get along with. I was the unorthodox candidate of this scenario, trying to get a job in the finance department. Sat in with the CFO and the director of internal audit, both football guys, so I was able to talk intelligently about football with them. Got to the part where we were talking about experience with Excel. I was fairly proficient and said I use it for fantasy football calculations. Impressed at the detail and use of formulas, pivot tables, etc. to determine drafting. Nerdy, I know, but their college teams were my college team's rival. So when they asked if I was a fan, clearly they already knew since my alma mater was on the resume, I said I hated their team and ranted for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Later found out that I was qualified for the job, but what sold them was that I was not an A-kisser and didn't attempt to suck up to them by pretending I was something I wasn't, like a fan of their team just to attempt to get the job. Still working there 5 years later with a couple of raises. Biggest lesson I learned that day was that although you might be technically qualified, don't pretend to be a person you aren't. Honesty and being politely blunt is something that people respect. Just to be clear, I wasn't being a D when I was ranting about college football. It was friendly banter. Not me, but a friend went to an interview for a trampoline park I worked at as well. The manager that does the interview tries his best to be intimidating despite him being a really relaxed guy. He's a big 6'2" and kinda rounded, so it normally works for him. 5 minutes into the interview, he asked, "Do you have any experience with kids?" My friend says, "I was a kid once." Manager starts dying. He got the job. In a company that I used to work for, interviews were scored. The candidate got points for education, experience, interview skill, etc., etc. There were always 5 points for receptionist. Quite simply, the receptionist out of the front would be able to give a mark out of 5. Guy walks up and says, "Mr. Smith is expecting me," while talking on his phone. He's probably getting 0 points. Guy, who, when called into the interview, leaves the waiting room in a mess but is otherwise polite, -2 points, etc. We once had a candidate get 10 out of 5 points, bonus points, from the receptionist. As the guy got out of the lift, a staff member got out in front of him and dropped her load of files she was carrying. The guy immediately stopped, helped her collect everything, and helped her tidy stuff up. Then, when he was in the reception waiting area, the coffee man came by. He comes by every day to see if anyone wants to buy coffee. The candidate asked the receptionist what the staff member's name was and arranged for her to be sent a coffee. He got the job. He also got the girl, who he is now married to. I was hiring engineers right around the time the USSR collapsed. This was East Coast, and there were a lot of Russian Jews being sponsored on some special visa program, but not exactly sure of the timing. Often, those candidates were not at all qualified, but there was no way to check work history, and they had local help making their resumes look right, so an in-depth interview was critical. Anyway, I interviewed one engineer and he seemed competent, and after asking him questions, I pull out some product sheets to show him what we made at this company. One product was a very specialized tool for the semiconductor industry. He took one look and said, "Oh yes, I designed that tool." I was confused, but he claimed to have designed this tool, which I knew for a fact was designed by my company. He then started telling me about one feed mechanism which was very unreliable and how it gave him a lot of problems. He really did know it by sight. It turns out the Soviets bought a few years earlier, and he was the guy responsible for reverse engineering and copying it. I hired him, but in truth, he had a hard time understanding that the Soviets were copying everything from the West, even though that is exactly what he was doing over there. Once in a while, the subject of a company or technology would come up and how it was developed by Intel or whoever, and he would say, "Oh yes, that is what they told you," as if I was the one who had been lied to for years. My manager had me interview a new incoming engineer. By the time he got to me at 1 p.m. for our lunch, he had interviewed with 6 other people, engineers, managers, and VPs of the company. I told him, "Look, you're probably technically qualified, but I'll let the others decide that. My role is now to see if you're sarcastic enough for the team." He rolled with an hour of sarcasm, jokes, and nonsense. We hired him that day. My actual instructions were to make sure this guy is not too much of an a-hole. He was by far the nicest of the bunch of us. My manager told me that I impressed him by asking how many people left his group over the past year and why they left. I honestly thought it was going to pee him off the moment I asked and wished I could take it back. Since it was only 2 people, I asked him why each of them left. He had to explain that one of them was basically someone who hated working there and why they hated working there to me. The other guy just moved somewhere closer to home for more money. Side note, my favorite question to ask is, what will my day typically be? Imagine I come in, hang up my jacket, and sit down at my desk. What do I start on and how does the day typically go? The main reason I ask this question is so they get an image in their head of me working at their company. I feel like it's a good question, but that's just my own assumption. I was hiring a summer intern and had 2 final candidates who had passed phone screens and were coming in for in-person interviews. I asked my favorite question, "What did you do to prepare for this interview?" Candidate A, guy who goes to an Ivy League school and went to the same prestigious local high school as a few team members who were all pulling for him to get the job, said, "I looked up the company website for any recent news and looked you up on LinkedIn to make sure I had a good sense of who I was meeting with and what's going on in your world." Perfectly reasonable and standard answer, if a bit boring. Candidate B, girl who goes to no-name Midwest school, said, "In the phone screen, you asked me a question about the future direction of your industry, and I didn't feel like I gave a really good answer because I didn't know enough about it. So I spent the weekend reading articles to learn more about what's happening now, and I feel like I have a better understanding of what you're working on." She then went on to amend her answer and explain what she had learned. It was clear she wasn't just regurgitating information and had actually spent time thinking about what she read. That impressed the H out of me, and I pushed hard to make sure we hired her. She was an excellent intern, and I am still in touch with her. Thank you for watching. Guys, thank you for all of the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.